It's the final word with Geoff Lemon and Adam Collins. A little update from our marathon running friend Declan Lawler, who's doing more than running marathons. He's running giant marathons, multiple marathons upon marathons, running the entire length of the Thames River in the space of 4 days to raise money for the Lord's Taverners.
He'll need a bloody ZOLEO.
He will.
He'll need a ZOLEO.
End up. Who knows where he's going to end up? He'll be needing to send messages when his legs fall off. He says 5 weeks to go now. And in order to achieve my weekly mileage target while holding down a full-time job, I've resorted to running twice a day, usually once in the morning and once at lunch. This is bananas, Declan. You can't do that. It leaves you exhausted by the evening. Getting a lot of sleep, apparently, in the evening, and noting the increase in temperatures as England heads into summer. But Declan says he's excited to report the fundraiser is now at £999.71. Someone push him over the 4 figures mark, please. He'd like to thank all the Final Word listeners for their donations so far. And he says at times, like at 6:30am when my alarm goes off and I have to drag my carcass out of bed, my motivation does falter. But knowing that my efforts are going to help people gives me the extra boost I need to keep going. Get on it, Declan. Keep those legs working.
So we'll put all of that in the show notes as well to let you know how you can donate to Declan's cause, which we've been talking a lot about on Storytime. But yes, if you're not a Storytime listener, you won't know the work that Declan's been doing alongside the Lord's Taverners, which is just fantastic.
It is. We've got news out of England, Adam. The England women's central contracts list has come out ahead of the women's test match coming up next week, which you're going to be at and watching. 17 contracts coming in, and most notable for Sophia Dunkley getting her first central contract.
Yeah, so this is really important because it's the first year when the central contracts have been aligned with the domestic contracts. So we'll talk a bit about the Rachel Heyhoe-Flint Trophy, but the new regional structure means that there is a bit of a safety net if you lose your contract. So there was the well-documented example of Tash Farrant a couple of years ago who fell off the central contract list, but kind of was in limbo land for a while there. Well, one player has been left off, Kirsty Gordon, the spinner from Scotland, who played so well in the World T20 back in 2018, but has been kind of squeezed for opportunities with, I suppose, Sophie Eccleston principally doing that role. And the emergence, I suppose, of Sarah Glenn, the leg spinner, and Maddie Villiers, the off spinner from Essex. It means that someone like Kirsty drops off. But now she drops off into the regional structure and she'll remain a professional cricketer. So these particular round of contracts run from the 1st of May through until the 31st of October next year, 2022, so that they're all aligned into the future. And yeah, there won't be players who are trying to make their way in the game who, it's quite common for a men's player to fall off the contract list, but you don't want a situation where they then fall away from the game. So yeah, it's a positive in terms of the reforms that have been made in the last couple of years.
Yep. The general sort of senior players you'd expect to see there in Beaumont, Brunt, Heather Knight, Amy Jones, Siver, Shrubsole, Fran Wilson, Lauren Winfield, Danny White. I guess I was a little surprised to see Georgia L was still on that list. She just, I don't mean this to sound dismissive, but she seems like a player from a previous era more than one who's got that much to offer in the current era, but maybe she's remaking herself.
Yeah, I think that it probably has a bit to do with generation change and not wanting to do it too quickly. You're right, a lot of very familiar names on that list. Kate Cross as well, who's been around for a long time. But at the same time, there's Freya Davis, who's in her second year as a contracted player, I think, but coming through, getting a couple of opportunities for England. We already mentioned Sophie Eccleston, who's the number one bowler in the world. Sarah Glenn, the leg spinners, had a fantastic year, also making runs for the Central Sparks in the Heyhoe-Flint Trophy. Katie George, great story, perhaps the quickest of the lot. She's had a lot of injuries, but now gets a chance to play for England again. Looking forward to watching her play. And then Maddie Villiers, the off-spinner, who debuted against Australia back in 2019, but looks ready to take the next step. So it's a well-balanced squad. The fact that there are all of these central contracts, 17 of them in total, you add that to the 41 domestic contracts, that means that 58 players are being paid to play cricket in England. 58 women, I should say, are being paid to play cricket for England this year, which, when you consider it used to be 14 central contracts, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, and it's only going to make the women's game at an international and a domestic level get better and better year on year.
And the other aspect with Sophia Dunkley being that England haven't had a black woman playing cricket for them since Ebony Rainford-Brent retired.
Yeah.
Sophia Dunkley's coming into that contracted list now and a chance to make some headway.
Yeah, a very capable hitter and a good leg spinner option as well. Certainly in short forms when they need to have a number of bowling options, she's one of those. But yeah, she made her debut in the Caribbean in 2018 as well at that World T20 competition. Didn't get much of an opportunity and hasn't really played too often for England since. But that's a sign of faith in a young player that she's got plenty to offer.
So you talked about the Heyhoe, Let's Go Rachel Heyhoe-Flint Trophy that's been played at the moment. This is the 50-over domestic women's trophy going on at present. And our statistician friend Hypercourst from the internet, he lives on the internet, Hypercourst, has been keeping a lot of numbers, basically saying that it's much, much better for batting this year. They've been smashing a lot more runs. So in the first 12 games of the Rachel Heyhoe-Flint Trophy this year, compared to previous versions of this tournament or of other 50-over tournaments over the previous 5 years or so, which have all involved 25 to 30 games, even in the first 12 games so far this year, there have been more centuries scored, more sixes hit, more innings scores of over 250. The two biggest run chasers in List A women's cricket in England as well, and a higher run rate across the board of nearly 5 per over than any of the previous editions of a 50-over competition. It's the professionalisation revolution is still making its impact felt in very noticeable ways.
Yeah, those two monster chasers on the opening day of the competition a couple of Saturdays ago, which gave it great coverage and a number of centuries being made at better than a run of ball. And as Hypercourse goes on to explain, I mean, what we're seeing with the stats on this comp is they're far more in line with the WNCL, which has been in operation for a long time, but been professionalised in the last 5 years. And it all tallies, doesn't it, that we're now seeing an uptick in all of the areas of the game that you'd expect. We saw that with the Kia Super League from Season 1 to Season 2 to Season 3. Far more sixes, for example. The run rate went up. And the same with the WBBL, Geoff. You did that. You crunched
Massively.
those numbers, didn't you, a couple of years ago, where we went from WBBL 1, I mean, I'm plucking a number out of the sky here, but about 110 was the average score. That doesn't win you games anymore. And we're seeing a similar pattern wash through 50-over women's cricket in England now.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. Amy Jones on top of the runs list thus far, nearly 300 runs in 3 hits.
Yes.
Not bad going. We've never really seen the best of Amy Jones in Australia, I think, in the WBBL or when she's been out there playing for England. Catherine Brunt still leading all comers on the wickets tally with 9 thus far, as does Tash Farrant, who's back amongst it, who you just mentioned before.
Yeah, Emma Lamb, good story from the Thunder. She made a century on the same day as her brother for Lancashire earlier in the season. And this was in county cricket, so both playing for Lancs. 2 weeks ago, so during the Roses game, Danny made a half century batting at number 8 and Emma made a century on the first day of the season for the Thunder. So she's going quite well too. Likewise, players like Danny White, Tammy Beaumont, Lauren Winfield-Hill, players you'd expect to dominate at domestic level have all been doing so far in the season. One other stat for you, there have been nearly 1 million live stream views for the 12 games so far. That's compared to 500,000 in the 24 games that were played last year. So, yes, that's a function partly of people becoming more conditioned to watching streams through the county championship, but it also speaks to the fact that people want to watch this cricket. And look, it started so well. It's a really encouraging season, and now we go into the internationals. India are playing their test match here against England next week. It starts on Wednesday, I think. I should know because I'm commentating it. Wednesday or Thursday, one or the other, down at Bristol. But the fact that India want to play more test cricket. I heard Nick Hockley talking to Pete Lawler and Gideon Haigh on the It's Cricket Etc. Podcast, and it just kind of, they asked him the direct question about should there be 2 and 3 day domestic women's cricket in Australia to complement the WNCL. And whilst he gave the company line about T20 being the future of women's cricket and where most investment should go, he balanced that by saying it's a really positive thing that multi-format series are being played with Test cricket. So I think that we're getting closer to a consensus that we want to see not only more Test cricket, but a pathway that countries around the world will have a sophisticated enough domestic system that it can account for 2 or 3 day cricket at the level down as well.
and even if they don't at this point, like there's no harm done in playing a few more test matches, in making each bilateral series rather than having 7 ODIs and 5 T20s or whatever it is. Putting a test match in there isn't going to kill anybody. The other thing to look at was the win by the Netherlands over Ireland. Now, this just wasn't just about winning the match that they won, but they actually won an ODI series against Ireland 2-1. So it was a thriller in the first game where the Netherlands made 195 only, but managed to defend it by 1 run. They just held off the Irish at the end. They got smashed in the second game by 8 wickets, but they came back to win the decider by 4 wickets in the run chase themselves. So remarkable in the context of the points that they're getting for the one-day Super League that's going on at the moment, and also that last time they played an ODI series against Zimbabwe, they beat them too. So this is the Netherlands beating 2 test nations, two of the supposedly bigger dogs, or bigger than them, certainly, in the dog rankings of world cricket.
You've got to love the form line, don't you? Ireland beat England last year at Southampton, and Netherlands have beat Ireland. So it does reinforce that point that this is a good thing, the 13 teams playing in this World Cup Super League. Yes, it's all over the place due to COVID. So you look at the table, and Bangladesh and England and Ireland have played 3 series of 3 games compared to South Africa. Zimbabwe have only played 1. The Netherlands, likewise, New Zealand have only played 1 too. But the top 8 there go straight through to the World Cup. But the next 4 aren't out of it. They'll go into this qualifier, which will be super exciting as well. So only 1 team is effectively bundled out at this stage. Currently, that's Sri Lanka on the bottom of the table, having played 6 games, so they'll need to get a wriggle on. But yeah, looking forward to seeing this become more and more a part of the conversation we have around 50-over cricket in the couple of years between now and the 2023 World Cup.
Well, Netherlands at 9 on the rankings will be pretty heartening for them, even if they're just outside the automatic qualifications spot. It's quite good reading. Netherlands 9, India 8. Very, very interesting. And how much, if Netherlands keep going up the list, how much they'll have to keep shrinking the table in order to cut them out when they show the rankings for world cricket. But I suppose the top 8 is a reasonable thing to look at given the automatic qualification. I think we're just about the end of the show, are we? Anything else to cover?
Feels good to me. I think we've done plenty. We should put a pin in it and come back for the weekend show. And we'll be recording the weekend show tomorrow as it happens, so we won't have much time to re-loop on the Nerd Pledge stuff. But if you haven't been listening to Storytime, the stories are probably getting longer and more elaborate and more detailed, which means a lot more work for us through the week. But yes, it's turning into a show that's just as popular as the weekly show. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's certainly a thing.
This is the final word. Geoff Lemon and Adam Collins. We will have Storytime on the weekend. We'll be back with the daily show for the next England-New Zealand test match as well.
Yes.
That goes up on the podcast feed, usually a couple of hours after the end of play, where we'll sort of wrap up the day in about 15 minutes and run you through some of the more interesting and amusing things that happened during that day as well. If you don't have time to watch 8 hours of Test cricket a day, we'll be doing that for the World Test Championship Final 2 and onward through the summer with India and England in those Test matches. The Final Word podcast is on the Bad Producer Podcast Network. Lots of other shows that they have if you want to check them out. It's edited by Dave Collins, no relation, and it is supported by Woodstock Cricket. You can get a nice, sweet discount on cricket equipment by using the code that's in the show notes. Get on there. And if you want to communicate with people around the world, ZOLEO.com. Go and get yourself some satellite hookups. And that's it for the show today. We'll see you next time we record, or we won't see you because it's a podcast. It's not a visual medium in the first place, and even if it is, it's one way. So even if it were visual, you wouldn't see us. You could see us with the video, which is on YouTube. So it is a visual medium, but we still can't see you. But we'll be with you again soon.
Bye.